This conference will now be recorded.
As a reminder, as I just said, this webinar is being recorded for later reference, including for those who did not get to attend today. And please enter your name and organization in the chat box, especially since not everyone shows up with their name or organization on the webinar. Okay. And of course, please mute yourself when you are not talking. We'll start with a presentation and demonstration of the new database tool, followed by a question and answer period, and then have closing remarks. The purpose of this webinar is to familiarize future users with the new project database tool that WAMPO has developed to replace the project tracker. We'll demonstrate the functions of the tool and also get into possible areas for improvement, including feedback from all of you. In 2016, WAMPO switched from using Access databases to track its MTP and TIP projects to using the project tracker through a contract with Eco Interactive. It gave us access to a password-protected website that sponsor agencies could use to add, amend, or adjust projects, as well as set up automatically a public version of the website that was not editable, but which got things out to the public in a timely manner. And it also tracked and stored all versions of every project, so that we could know how anything had been changed in the past easily, and automatically produced a variety of the reports used in our work, although not always in the way we would have preferred. It definitely had its share of drawbacks in addition to benefits. But in 2020, for budgetary reasons, WAMPO decided to end the contract for the project tracker with Eco Interactive and go back to using Access databases, which is what we'll be presenting on now. The contract with Eco Interactive ended April 1st, and can everyone see these slides?
I can see, Nick.
Okay, good. Anyway, as I said, the new tool is in Microsoft Access. Now, the resulting files will not be available for direct download on the WAMPO website, and certainly not directly editable online. But they will be available via Dropbox or by other means upon request, especially to project sponsors. And PDF reports for the MTP and TIP will still be posted to the WAMPO website as always. In designing these Access databases for the MTP and separately for the TIP, an attempt was made to replicate as much of the functionality and information, and to an extent layout as the project tracker, but also with some things changed in order to make them more intuitive, easier to navigate, and easier to generate reports from. You'll see in a moment whether or not we succeeded with any of that. And for the amendment process, sponsors will be asked to edit a copy of the database that they download, which will be, and then return it to WAMPO for incorporation into a master database from which reports will be generated. Although sponsors may also ask WAMPO to make the changes directly on their behalf in case working with the database does not work for a given sponsor. And I will now turn things over to Amanda Aguila Gonzalez, intern at WAMPO, who will present on the MTP database. And let me just take a moment to let her share her screen.
Thanks, Nick. Could you enable me to share my screen?
Yes, it's just need to find your name here. There it is. Okay, Amanda, you're good to go.
All right, before I get started, I just want to confirm, can everyone see my access screen?
Yes.
Okay, and let me see if I can, usually I can make this side smaller. Okay, well, thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm just gonna quickly go through the MTP form and what does that form look like and how to enter. So basically, the first thing you would see when you would open it are some instructions similar to this. And then you would click MTP form to enter projects or amendments, etc. So there are a couple of tabs here in the top where it says previous projects, next project, find project, new project. So if you were entering a new project, you would want to click new project, which automatically clears all these fields. And so the first thing you would want to do in the action being taken, you would want to select new project. And because we selected new project, then we would leave this section blank, the kind of amendment. That is only applicable if you are submitting an amendment. Here, very similar, very like the project tracker, you would enter project title. I'm going to enter some just information, but it's just going to be for the purposes of this tutorial. So I'm just going to enter like the word WAMPO. And just keep in mind, this is just not real data. So project title, there we go. And there is, as you can see, arrows here. So it's not limited to a few words. It's very much like a tracker in that sense. Here you could put, very similar to the tracker, I would say like WAMPO region. And then the project scope, which can be as short or as long as you need it to be. Again, very much like the project trackers. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm obviously making these entries a little bit shorter. So then, a lot like the tracker, then you would select primary mode. So let's say that it is biped, and then the group name. So there's East Kellogg, none. North Junction, Northwest Bypass, US 54, and I-235. So I'm going to go with no. So here's something that looks a little bit different, but it still captures. So in the tracker, you see there's a prompt that says biped component, yes, no. So here in this new tool, if there is a biped component, then you would just check mark here. If there's no biped component, then you would just leave that blank. So then here you would select whether or not any parts of the project encompass these 3 counties. And as you can see, it allows to check all. You can check 1 or you can check none. Then you move on to lead agency. So this a drop-down menu, so you don't have to write anything here. You would just select from this drop-down menu. So I'm going to go with WAMPO just for the purpose of this tutorial. So hopefully you all can see, I know that the font's a little bit small. So when I select lead agency here, it automatically changes up here in the top. So that is, you don't have to enter anything there. Once you select it down here, it would automatically generate in the top. Here you would select the administrative contact and organization. Just for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to add my name, and I'm going to say that the lead organization is WAMPO. And then phone number. So I'm just going to go with a couple of digits so you can see. So preferably you would want to enter your phone number. We provided here just kind of how you would enter that phone number, as well as the email address that you would enter here. So then and Nick, please feel free to jump in if I miss something. So here you would move to the funding information. So this does look a little bit different than the tracker, like first glance, but really it's actually very much like the project tracker. So there's a little confusing things, and I'll go over those. So let's say it's a 4%. So you would just manually enter that here. And then once you move to the, oops, forgot to enter an email address. So there are some fields that are mandatory. This was a good lesson. You want to make sure that you, and I am making these numbers up. You want to make sure that you enter that. And then now you move on to the funding information. So just for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to, first you want to set your years, very similar to the tracker. And then when you select the funding type, you will see a drop-down list where you can select federal, non-WAMPO, federal WAMPO, local, state or unknown KDOT, and then you would add the numbers, very, very similar to the tracker. So let's say it is local, and let's say I'm just gonna go with, how many zeros is that? 3, okay, so 15,000. Let's say, so you see you can even, like I remove the $sign and I can add it, and so that's not a big deal. And so it could be 1 funding line, it could be 2 funding lines, however many you need. As you can see, there's nothing generating down here in the totals. You would need to navigate away from right now where your cursor is to be able to see that. So for example, I'm going to click right down here, and so now you see that this down here updated. So let's say there's another, there's another entry that I want to do. As you can see, as I start writing another entry, a 3rd line pops up. And so that'll happen. So you'll always be able to add however many funding lines you're needing. And let me scroll a little bit more. So down here in the bottom, make sure you don't miss that. You would check if the estimated total project cost is equal to the total program dollar amount. Very, very similar to the tracker, where you would find that in the funding section as well. Here, if you have documents that you are needing to upload, which may not be the case, as you can see, this is an optional field. Here you would add the date. So you can select the little calendar icon and just select whatever date you're needing to include. Like let's say I'm going to do tomorrow for argument's sake. And then you can add a description here. So if it's a statement, I would indicate that here. I would then select what type, and you can see a very similar to the tracker, a drop-down menu of different documents that you may need to submit. So I'm just gonna pick one just for argument's sake. And then as you click on the files icon, it gives you see that there's a little bit attachment icon. And then that'll let you'll click add, and it'll take you to your, wherever you're navigating, whether that's your laptop or wherever it is that you have that document saved, and you can find that and upload it. And then once you have your document, you would just click OK. The next section down here, so this is for math, this is optional. And this is for WAMPO use only, the section down here, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Just a little caveat with this. As you can see, there is a field up here that says WAMPO ID. You don't have to worry about that. WAMPO will assign that ID. So once you're done with entering all your information for that new project, you can click here, Save Project. This is just for test. I just save that project, and then that's it. And then I can exit out of here and then be done with that. Make sure that you do save, if you wanted to save different versions of it, that you save your database. Make sure you save that up here as well, and the little smaller icon. So that is basically how you would enter a new project. I'm gonna move on to adding a couple details for like an amendment, and I think we'll get to questions at the end. But if someone is having trouble hearing me, please let me know, or if you're having trouble seeing this, please let me know. I don't know if I can make it any bigger, but I can certainly try. So let's say that we're wanting to do an amendment at this time. I'm gonna just find, let's say this is the project I want to amend, this new project that I just added. So obviously, I've saved it, I came back, I want to submit an amendment. So what I would do here is, in the action being taken, if it's an unchanged project, this would be what I select. If I want to remove it from the MTP, I would select remove from MTP. Or if I want to add an amendment, then that's what I would select. At this point, if you're doing an amendment, you'll most likely have a WAMPO ID already. And then you'll select what the kind of amendment is. So there's lots to choose from here. And there's also an other option if you feel like that anything from this list may not be what you're looking for. So then you can add something here in this other category. You can do a narrative explanation, but as you saw earlier, you didn't have to do that for when submitting a new project or an amendment. So if you didn't include it, you'll still be able to save it, but it's always good to include that. You can make adjustments to any of the fields, project limits. You can make adjustments to the project scope. You can make adjustments to anything. Like I want to change the administrative contact. It's no longer Amanda. I'm going to add Nick. Nick is now the administrative contact. There's changes in the funding. You can remove that and add, maybe now it's, obviously this is me entering not real data, but so you can make all those changes. Make sure that you do select that you're making an amendment. And then you would go down if there are documents that you're needing to include. And then you would go right back up and save that. And that is pretty much it for the MTP projects. Nick, is there anything else that you'd like me to share for this access sheet?
Yes, I'd just like to point out one thing about the funding section. The MTP tool in the project tracker had a function for automatically applying inflation assumptions to the future dollars column, but here it is, you would have to do that calculation yourself before entering it in this particular database as we have it set up now. And that's it. All any other points would be things that are held in common with the TIP database, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Okay, well, I am going to close out of this, and we can certainly add that comment Nick made into the instructions for when you're entering the future funding as a reminder to always calculate that inflation assumption prior to entering that. We can definitely add that note. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, Nick, for the TIP database demo.
Thank you. Okay, the TIP database is set up in very large part similarly to the MTP database. And again, this what you're seeing now is the page that appears as soon as you open the Access database. For the moment, it just has the one button, but later it will have instructions and links to buttons for generating reports and other stuff of that nature. But for now, for the meat of the thing, going into the main data entry form. Now, because there is more information that goes into the tip than the MTP. There are at the top of the form, it's actually divided into 4 different tabs rather than all being on one page. So project information, funding information, attachments, and a tab that is for WAMPO staff only. One problem with the way things are set up here is that sometimes, not all the time, it'll default to showing you the very bottom of a given tab, and you'll have to scroll back up to the top if that's where you want to enter information. The WAMPO staff only page is mostly for for indicating that a change has been accepted and any comments about that, and probably most importantly, indicating all the different versions of the tip that the project has been included in or has been changed in, so that we can tell from our archives exactly where to find all the prior versions and compare them and know exactly what has changed at each point in time. And the attachment page is pretty much the same as what Amanda was showing. For the moment, there will not be anything in the maps window on this page. One because the files of maps in Project Chapter are not easily converted over in this manner, and for another because we are putting together a master GIS file of the locations of all of the projects in the region, which would make individual ones not necessary, but we're leaving this here for attaching map files just in case. It doesn't hurt anything to have it, so we're leaving it there. Now, at the beginning of a tip adoption, there are some projects that are amended, but others that are simply carried over from the previous one. So it will be just carryover project unchanged. Or as I discussed, you click amend/adjust, or if you have clicked new project, it gets you would also select new project here to make that clear. And one in the project tracker was called delete project. We use the word remove to make it clear that you are not causing the record to be removed from the database when this happens. Now, these buttons up at the top of previous project, next project, find project, new project, and save project are all actually redundant of functions that are already in Access. For example, first record, previous record, next record, last record, new blank record down here. But these buttons are included to make it more obvious how you can do certain things. Now, if you choose to amend a project, then there's a matter of whether or not it will need to be a formal amendment or can be simply an administrative adjustment that does not require approval by the WAMPO Transportation Policy Body. And if it's an administrative adjustment, or you think it qualifies for an administrative adjustment, then you would click this checkbox here, and otherwise you would not. And you can choose any or all of these checkboxes for when you are amending or adjusting, including the other box. And you get plenty of space in which to enter information on it as you like. And whether you're amending or selecting or making a new project or any other action, you always have the option of putting in a narrative explanation. Okay, these next Now, a big part of what we need to keep track of is making sure that every project is referenced in the MTP in some way. So that usually means including a project ID number from the MTP, which can either be a number that is specific to this TIP project, a one-to-one relationship, or it could be a so-called bucket project from the MTP that multiple TIP projects may come from. And we also need to make sure that it's referencing the correct MTP, because we have some TIP projects that have been carried over for more than 5 years, and as a result, their MTP information will need to be updated from the MTP that was adopted in 2015 to the MTP that was adopted in 2020. And just in case a project is not included by a specific project reference number, then if such a case occurs, then there is a field for entering that information. Also, sometimes a TIP project is split from another pre-existing TIP project. This is also something that's in the project tracker, but you can select that and then say which project it was split off from. And then, of course, the KDOT project ID, the federal project ID, these are optional, just like in the project tracker. They are not necessarily need to be included. And this should also be familiar, the primary mode and group name. You may notice that all the drop-down lists get automatically put in alphanumeric order. That is just the default, but the order works out fairly well as it is. And again, we have the checkbox for whether or not the project has a bicycle/pedestrian component, and for the percentage going towards bike ped, although that is, for now, that has been rarely used. And under lead agency, again, it is alphabetical, going first with the cities and then the counties. In order to get the counties grouped together, they were entered as county of such and such instead of such and such county. And KDOT, and then all the transit organizations grouped together, and finally WAMPO. Contact information, and then finally on this tab, contact information for the administrative contact and the engineering contract, just like in Project Tracker and as Amanda showed previously. And on the funding information tab, again, you have the text field for inflation assumptions from which the below numbers come. And for saying whether or not the estimated total project cost equals the total program. And if you do not check this, then you enter something in this box here. And again, that parallels the project tracker, where this field shows up only if this is not checked. And then the checkbox for whether or not funding is reasonably anticipated. It usually is, but it is, you are asked to confirm that. And explain the funding sources, just like in the project tracker. And now getting down into the actual funding entering. Now, it works much the way as Amanda showed before. You can enter whatever number of records you want, each for a different combination of year, funding source, and how it's set up. Now, unfortunately, as you can see here, the years do not automatically sort into chronological order. There may be a way to make that happen in the form, but so far we have not figured it out. And again, of course, that's federal fiscal year and not calendar year. And you can add more when necessary, but for now we have all the same funding categories as there are in the project tracker. And for the federal ones, you can set it up as an advanced construction setup. So for the year that the sponsor agency would pay in, you select AC and then say whether it's local or state funding. And then for the payback year, you would select ACCP, but the fund type, you would select the federal source either way. Now, you may not be used to seeing this quite this way, but for construction projects, there would be utility relocation, preliminary engineering, right-of-way construction, and construction engineering. And then for planning and transit projects, there'd be implementation, capital, and operations. And we're showing all of them at once, even though usually you would either have entries in these 5 columns or these 3 columns, but not both. Now, the total amounts at the end of each row update when you navigate from one of these cells to the next, but the totals down below only update after you move from one row to the next, and likewise for these indications of the percent non-federal match. You may notice that there are 2 rows for the total. That is because of the AC and ACCP. Unfortunately, in principle, the AC and ACCP amounts should always come out to the same totals as they do here, but it's not a given, and it is something worth having as a check. And so it is shown both based on both, the totals based on both, and then above, using the same premise, showing the non-federal match, both for the total and for the individual phases, which of course, different funding programs would have different rules in this regard. And so it's shown for every field, even though not all of them would be relevant. And below that are a series of additional reporting fields that are not editable merely for informational purposes, but unfortunately, as we made a note of here, you would either have to close the form or navigate to a different project in the form and then back to this one, see any changes in these tables down here. So, which summarize the information a variety of ways, by fiscal year, by funding source, by funding source and year, and also by WAMPO distributed or not WAMPO distributed. Now, we have most of the basic functionality that you'll be working with when you enter stuff in this database is already entered here, and so, but we are. Anyway, that's most of that. Pretty much most of the rest Amanda already covered. As she said, the WAMPO ID is assigned by WAMPO, so you would not be able to do anything with it. In fact, this will be a frozen field. And let's see. And I believe that's everything I had for the moment to discuss here. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And Amanda, did you have anything to, Amanda or Chad, did you have anything to add before we go into the question and answer period?
No, thanks, Nick, Amanda, for the effort you put. It's a lot of data, a lot of features for the projects, and the ability to get the final reports from these database. So thank you both. So let us have a input from the sponsors and the users, and then we'll see how we can make this even better. Thank you.
Okay, so you can either enter your questions in the chat box or unmute yourself and take your pick.
Hey, Nick,
Yes.
back on the form where you're selecting counties, is that intended to be select that because you're always in a county, select one, or is that select because you're in the unincorporated area of the county?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Where it says any part of the project is in Butler, Sedgwick, Sumner, that is not just the unincorporated parts. You would select at least one of these for every project, even if it's inside, even if it's entirely inside a municipality.
That's what I figured, but want to make sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Nick, this is Renee from KDOT.
Yes.
I think that this looks really good and it's pretty intuitive and I'm very impressed. I just had one question as far as the KDOT project ID. I was wondering if that could be a required field if it has federal dollars.
Well, the trouble with that is it doesn't always have a KDOT ID when it is first entered. So they would have, but yes, it could be made mandatory if every project sponsor could be counted upon to have that information at the start. And keep in mind, for example, the transit projects would not ever have that anyway. So it would have to, I don't know, I'm not sure if there's a way to make it conditional. But for example, we could make a flag that tells you whether or not a project has it besides just seeing it there, I suppose.
Okay, it would just be helpful, or at least if it was just a reminder, or if project sponsors were encouraged to make sure to include that.
Okay, we could certainly include that in the instructions, yes.
Okay, I appreciate
that. As a bolded item or something.
Great, thank you. And this looks great, Nick. Good work.
Thank you.
And Amanda.
We have until it's scheduled until 4:30 just to make sure.
Yeah, we
incorporate everybody's comments. Renee, I also think the format was designed well, and the tabs is a new feature in the Access database to have, instead of having one tab with a lot of information, organize those into several tabs. And Nick was discussing that with me, and some of the good features in Access database and exploring and learning happened, but still there is room to make it user friendly. And reports are the most important thing, and then Nick is working on those. But for now, how do we incorporate the requests of the sponsors for amendments and adjustments is the key right now. So.
Right, and it is, I should mention, as some of you, right, so just got a question asking, in what instances would documents need to be uploaded? I am unaware of any specific instance where it would be necessary, and I frankly do not. I know that a majority of projects do not have documents uploaded. Chad, do you know anything about that?
Thank you. Any supplemental information for the project that the fields are not able to capture all the information would be helpful. There's always a lot of information about a project. For example, for call for projects, there's a form that's filled, the application, and there's several data components to it. For example, traffic counts, and so on and so on. The data that's related to the project itself. So any of such data that helps provide additional information that is otherwise limited to the fields that one is entering would be helpful. And it can vary to anything. It could be, oh, this would help the project to be complete, because instead of having that information with you, it is better to have it in the database. At some point later in the time, it is always helpful to see that supporting information. And this document would be based on case-by-case basis from one project to the other. Thank you.
And we just got another question in the chat box asking, also, do we need to amend the TIP and MTP, or once the TIP amendment is approved, WAMPO will update the MTP? Well, the TIP and MTP amendments are on very different schedules. It's only in rare circumstances will the MTP be amended outside of the once every 5-year adoption, and in between changes, and in between MTP adoptions or amendments, all TIP amendments need to be, all TIP adoptions and all TIP amendments need to be consistent with the MTP. So changes to the MTP do not trigger, excuse me, changes to the TIP do not trigger changes to the MTP. Rather, changes to the MTP enable changes to the TIP. Okay, we just got another question. Is there a place tracking fees to WAMPO by project? It did not occur to me to put in something for that, but we absolutely could, I am sure. So yes, that would be a fairly easy thing to include. Of course, I'm sure, and this chat box is being recorded along with the rest of the webinar, so we'll have a record of that as something to go back and see about putting in. Thank you for the suggestion. And one of got a message from someone saying that Dropbox does not work for them as a means of downloading a copy of the database. So I don't know how many others of you have that limitation, but if it applies to you, please get in contact with us, and we will figure out a way to make it work for you. Some other means. Unfortunately, the current database is over 30 megabytes. So we're not working email for a lot of people as well. But you can contact me at nicholas.flanders@wampo.org or call my office phone, area code 316-779-1315. Okay. Are there any more questions at this time? Or comments or suggestions for that matter?
Looks like there are no questions. And if you think of any, please feel free to email Nick. And there is always, this recording will be sent to you. And also we'll find a way to you to have an access to this, perhaps on WAMPO website. We will also look into that. And then Nick will send a link to that. And after you review one more time with this database tool, perhaps you will have more thoughts and comments. So we welcome those thoughts and comments from you. So if there are no questions, we can wrap up the meeting.
One other function in Access that actually two that I forgot to mention. First is that there's also the option of uploading documents that are outside of any project that would apply to the whole thing. For example, we could upload a map file of all the projects in the area, or of the current TIP document, or of definitions of various terms used in the database and document, etc., that kind of thing. And the other thing is that at some point we will have a way for the project sponsors to either digitally or manually sign a confirmation that they have requested these specific changes that they have, so that there is a paper trail confirming that everything has been agreed upon. This would be done in place of the password protected version of the website that tracks which user does what. And I believe Chad covered all the rest of our closing comments. So unless anyone else has anything left to say in the next less than a minute or so, even though we could go longer if we needed to, because we reserved until 4:30, I guess we'll be closing the meeting in just a moment then, unless someone else has something else they want to stick in here. Okay, I guess I'll call that a good meeting then, and talk to you all later. We'll let you know how to get access to this recording once it's prepared.